Turn off the TV screen, disconnect from the internet, and avoid the headlines. The world will feel safer once you're blind. It's easy to feel secure when you're not on the front line. When it's not your life at risk, it's easy to dismiss this national crisis when you don't live it. Just because this plague doesn't roam your school, hallways, workplace, or the streets of your neighborhood, you'll say it'll never happen to me. But it could. But since your life has been protected thus far as it should, you'll live out the rest of your days like the kids in the coffins wish they could. Everything a person was or ever could be is erased in an instant, yet to the masses this issue seems so distant. Even though the death count is staggering and so consistent, the efforts to reverse gun violence are nothing near persistent. Because the death count is just that, a number, not somebody's friend, teacher, sister, or mother, just another statistic to get buried along with the others whose names and stories will be forgotten just as quickly as their lives are stolen. People are dead, justice is not served, and families are broken. When will you decide to speak up? Now, or when your last words are spoken? Because indifference is more dangerous than any gun. It puts you in danger, everyone. To remain silent is the equivalent of siding with the oppressor. The value of a human life is growing lesser and lesser. Even though we might deny it, these numbers are just like you and I. With passions, goals, hobbies, and dislikes, much like you, they believe their life was a right, much like you. They never thought they'd be forced to survive and fight because it always starts with, it will never be me. But if you're doing nothing to maintain the safety of others, there's no guarantee. Public safety has a direct correlation with personal safety. America, you have forgotten that lately. You have lost touch with humanity. You have switched your priorities. It seems like dollar signs and profits are more important than unity. Our government leaders are focused on everything other than the people. It's like money is God and the government is the steeple. When will we realize that the true power lies in the hands of the people? That our leaders and our citizens are exactly equal. The only thing that sets us apart is the labels. The discussion is overdue and no one is at the table, yet there's millions of us perfectly healthy and able. These senseless killings are no fable. Thus, we must not live in fantasy. Plant the seeds so that every single person has the opportunity to live in peace. That's true equality. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Maria Cuomo Cole, and you've met Sam, you've met Bria, and our Us Kids director, Kim Snyder. And we're so thrilled to be here, and we want to thank you for taking the time, and thanks to our Zoom audience, and special, special thanks to Hunter College, Jennifer Rabb, and to Harold Holzer, director of Roosevelt House, this magnificent, very meaningful place, and dear friends and mentors, and we're so grateful. You know, we were very excited about screening here because in so many ways, these incredible, multi-talented, heroic activists truly embody the spirit of Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt and their commitment to social justice and to civic action. So we thank you, and with that, we're going to talk a bit and hopefully hear from you. And I want to acknowledge Cynthia Kane, our heartbeat co-producer of Us Kids, and we're so glad you're here, Cynthia. Thank you.
Being here tonight. And I just want to start off, I mean, we're just going to throw a couple of questions amongst us and then really want to hear from you and get some of your thoughts and reactions. But starting with you, Sam. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm sitting with three of my favorite women in the world. I feel so blessed to have had Maria on this journey and been through this with Bria and Sam. And Sam, we've had a multi-year journey together. I'm just sitting here, all these conversations about leaving Florida and maybe going to college in New York. I'm so thrilled that she landed here at Hunter. But I think the film, we've talked about it so many times, is for I think both of us as much about generational trauma as it is about gun violence prevention. And Sam has so beautifully with her art straddled those things. So I'm wondering now, as you look at the film, since it came out, how it feels seeing it, and how you think your story and this story can continue to help empower you and others?
That's a great question. Well, I certainly think that I was not the person I was yesterday. Nonetheless, was I the same person I was 3 years ago? So watching back this film, the dozens of times that I've already seen it, it's like this time capsule of this little idiot that I used to be. And, I was, I was so hurt and broken and angry and outraged, and I didn't know where to place those emotions constructively. And activism was an outlet for me, so that I could better navigate through those emotions while also contributing to a society that is also as broken and angry and outraged as I am. And so I feel like this film is an homage to that. It's a generation after generation of outrage. It wasn't just my generation, it's so many before me. And so I feel that this is a tool, a tool that people can use in times where they feel outraged and discouraged and outraged by the society that they live in, because it harbors just so much grief and trauma, not just among our children, but among everyone. Whether you've lived through gun violence or not, this is a tragedy that consistently happens and affects all of our lives, that we've become almost desensitized and numbed. And this is hopefully to remove that feeling of numbness, to remove that feeling of denial or desensitized or any of those feelings that you might, and get you up from your chair and encourage you to make a difference in a profound and significant way. Much like people of my age have been fighting for. It takes very strategic and very planned, articulated people to make a real difference. And that can be people in this audience, that could be people in their homes. And if this film reaches out to them and pushes them in the right direction, that's my only hope, is that it inspires people to have the courage to stand up against what is evil and what is wrong. And gun violence is probably the most evil thing in this country. So that's the hope with this film, is that not only can I grow with it and look back at it as a person that I used to be, but in a way I think we all can look at it, and because we were all young once, we were all young once, and we were all wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and hopefully that will reinvigorate you in a way, and reinvigorate the people who matter most, our politicians, our leaders, grassroots organizers, all of these people who make an influence. So that's the hope, is hope.
That's so true, and you give us so much hope. And Bria, we're so happy you're here. Bria took a train down from Emerson College to be with us, and so much has happened in this 3-year journey, and the world has changed so much. We're interested in hearing about your activism. You're a national board member of March for Our Lives, an activist in the race community for queer folk, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you see the film and your efforts moving even into 2022 for the next election cycle.
Yeah, so I would say after seeing the movie and having the production and seeing myself as a 17-year-old angry person just hoping for hope and freedom and liberation, that year of transitioning into college and moving away from my family and my community that I spent 18 years cultivating all the skills, 18 years cultivating all the resources, and being the precedent for young people, creating change and galvanizing that energy. I felt like, one, a sellout, two, I was fleeing a community that I spent almost all my my youth years really dedicating passion and activism into, but giving myself the chance and the grace to really follow a vision for myself and have that individuality that I felt like growing up in Milwaukee in a community which is predominantly Black, lots of inner city gun violence and lots of different things that were happening there. I felt like I could actually get that individuality when I got to Boston my first year, and then the pandemic happened and everyone was kicked out of college and back into back at home, and then I started seeing the same things mirroring in my community, but at a higher intensity because of the pandemic. Lots of exploitation, police brutality, homelessness, and so me and the community leaders, the young community leaders in Milwaukee, we started organizing again in June, when the Black Lives Matter riots were. I'm sorry, I don't even call that a riot, but when the Black Lives Matter protest and energy was happening, we started galvanizing it, and eventually ended up creating a 65-mile march from Milwaukee to Madison over a period of 5 days. And I would say that was another foot in where I could find that, sense of individuality within community again, because before in the movie, we spent a lot of time like absorbing so many stories. We spent a lot of time like meeting with other people, talking about violence, talking about death, like all within the period of 2 months. And so you see yourself becoming what you're absorbing. And this time it was different. When I was organizing in my community, we were able to like really talk to people, have that grassroots connection, have this communication. And it was a really hard time, followed by white supremacists. We had cops always over-policing our protests. We had people, wanting to go home because they felt too scared. A lot of black and brown kids feeling too scared. We didn't have media, so I think this outlet in this movie really showed, the privilege that comes with organizing, the privilege that comes with having a community setting, and having your voices amplified. But after that happening, I remember I caught a misdemeanor charge. I had to lawyer up and try to fight it because of protesting, and I just felt myself going in like this complete sense of losing my individuality again, because you can try so hard to fight against oppression, but there's always so many different barriers that really block you from feeling like you reached a goal. But like we seen on there, like we had the highest like youth voter turnout. We had so many young people in my own community who were before apathetic, actually coming out to these events, coming out to these community discourses, and wanting to talk about things that we wanted to change. So I think it really brought me to a position now where I needed 2021 to just take a breather, to take a breath, and to revision myself as an individual, not just a peace warrior at 24/7, always on high alert, and always passionate, because that is me, but it's also I have other different qualities and passions to do other things. So hopefully moving forward with organizing and understanding like my abolition thought theory, that it's really just a lifestyle. It's not really who you are, an embodiment all the time. You can be a person who loves music or loves fashion, but also wants to destroy the patriarchy, also wants to reform different policies and to revision what our world looks like today. So I would say 17-year-old me was just, to Sam's point, angry, hopeful, but don't really know like where that vision is. And I didn't like to sit with that the uncertainty. But now I'm 20, and like uncertainty isn't always so bitter. It feels like we still have a chance to make something happen, a chance to do something revolutionary.
So I think we really want to throw it out to hear some of your thoughts or questions, impressions.
Don't be shy. Yes, miss.
I'm Trudy Mason. Hi, Marie. And some of you, the Parkland 2 students, may know my friend Petey Yarrow, who came to Parkland last, I guess I got the time, August, but after your incident, after the shooting, and with a group of composers, and met with a lot of you, but also with the people who were in the choir, who were in the school chorus, and put together. He has told me about this, and when some of you came to New York, I had the opportunity to meet you, and it's so thrilling to meet you again. But I wonder if you might want to talk about that a little bit, about how the music, plus you used so much music in the film, which was wonderful. And I don't know if you've heard the music that they've composed, but they've actually put together a whole CD reflecting their experiences. So you may want to talk about it a little, and how music has played into all of this. And thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for this movie. It is something I'll get a copy and bring it to Peter. So thank you.
That's an excellent question. Well, use of music in the film is very intentional. It's very much a kind of a breathing, living entity within the film that like reflects a lot of the emotions and ideas that a lot of us young people were navigating through. And for me personally, music has always been an outlet for me, much like activism, much like other forms of art that came to me as being very therapeutic. Through music, I was truly allowed to escape in a medium that wasn't harmful to me, in a medium that was healing for me, in a medium that was enriching in a way that some things just couldn't stick. And I think that it's both beautiful in the sense that it can be such a healing entity while also being this one that can garner attention and strength from people. And I think music is a phenomenal way of just harboring support and attention towards, topics that are important. I mean, as we can see, like at the March for Lives demonstration, there was so many, A-list celebrity type performers and singers. And I guarantee you that many of the people who went out to that march were there for the Demi Lovato's and the Ariana Grande and the Miley Cyrus. And sure, that's fine, but with that, right, that novelty of what that was, you were able to capture a lot more people than you would have without those performers. So it's very strategic in the way that we do this. And that's why music is so powerful, because, in moments of strife and moments of anguish, it's really what can bring people together. And we can just, like close our eyes for a moment and hear the music and feel the music and return back. And I think that's what's quite beautiful about the whole thing. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to add that one of the things that I think was important to us was, and that's happened naturally since the movie, is intergenerational exchange around this issue and others. And so when I met Sam and she told me she was a real Bob Dylan fan, that was wonderful. And of course, it naturally came up because she covers his stuff beautifully. And then I think when we reached out to get the rights, Bob Dylan's agent, you just imagine that this is what they would want the legacy of their film to be, from those times to these times.
Hello. A couple questions from the Zoom audience. One for the filmmakers. What is it that made you want to focus on the issue of gun violence? What compelled you to make this film? And a question for Sam about the piece you read. Is it part of a larger project? Is there anything more you can tell us about that beautiful piece of work you shared with us?
I'll start by saying Maria and I have worked together for almost 8 years now and made a film called Newtown, and sort of happenstantially, honestly, not Maria had a history of working in the space. I happenstantially ended up in Newtown, and then we joined forces to create that film and felt passionately about a moment in time where we thought something might happen. And people always said the conversation didn't change, but we've had a lot of talks that we think the conversation did, and we have a long way to go. But the conversation's changed because so many new voices have entered the conversation, including the youth that grew up. So anyway, we came out of Newtown. We made a short film that was also gun violence related and hadn't let go of this idea, for me anyway, of trauma, of how many kids all over in Bria's neighborhood, in all of these places, live generationally with this trauma of gun violence. And then Parkland happened, and we knew we had to give a voice to this movement and a story that was more about rage and activism, whereas Newtown was more about grief and acknowledging that moment. So that's how the film came to be.
Oh, so Power Off is a complete poem. I am a poet and I know it. So yeah, I write a lot of poetry. As you saw in the film, my speech was actually another piece of spoken word poetry. I do, spoken word, I do traditional, all these other forms. I'm a real Renaissance man. I like to sing, I like to write, I like to, perform. This kind of like this ecosystem that's happening within me. Yeah, and it's like kind of like music, and much like many arts, it's another medium in which I can more accurately and more significantly express how I'm feeling and my opinions on certain subjects. So it's something that I hope to explore more in. My whole life isn't supposed to be doom and gloom all the time, talking about guns. It sucks. And I moved out here to New York City in hopes to be an artist. much like everyone else who moves out here to the city. And I'm just kind of seeing how that ride will take me and where it'll go. And I think Hunter has been a fantastic place of facilitating, both creativity and also making me a more studious scholar. And I'm just fantastically grateful that after, almost 3 years of not being on campus, being petrified of classrooms, that I'm welcomed back by a culture that is not only welcoming, but just incredibly inclusive. So shout out to Hunter. I saw the purple lady. I see you, purple lady.
Yes,
She seemed very eager.
The purple lady.
So I was, I think, watching the news one day when I saw this commotion on the news. And, I didn't pay too much mind to it. But I know it was gun violence, so I was a little bit worried about it because it's school. And the same way as I saw the World Trade Center. So I just, I didn't know there was going to be a movie about it. It's super awesome, super fascinating. I am so interested. It was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to heal after the bullet wound? And also, my second question is, did this movie? I think this movie has impact a lot of people because a lot of students. That's what I meant to say. So please tell me, how long did it take you to heal?
Well, the real answer is you never really do. This is kind of a lifelong journey. I still have, bullet fragments in my body, behind my eye, and my arm, and my legs, my face. It can cause, medical issues for me in the future, but in regards to healing from a gunshot wound, it took me about 6 months with the series of about 2 or 3 surgeries to both of my legs. And I had even still, I have a difficult time with long periods of time being up on my feet and things like that. So yeah, it's just, it's kind of a constant thing. But you raise a really great point, because both Bree and I are students, and that was kind of the goal. Was I wanted people our age to see us on the screen and say, I could do that. I could do that too, because you can. And that's kind of the whole point, is that in every turning point in history, especially American history, the people who had led all of these movements were always the youth, always our students, always our scholars. And, whether that was, from, places where I reside in or places where Bria resides in, the importance of youth activism is alive and well and always will be. And that is how we have, historically have made real change in this country, whether that's regarding, like the civil rights era, we're talking about Vietnam, if we're talking about, so many eras in history where youth were the very focal point, the very heart of the movement. So that was very intentional, and I'm glad that you saw that.
And my next question is that I was a little bit worried when I saw you throw up on the stage, and I was wondering, was it like nervousness, or what caused this nervousness?
I'm gonna do it again. It's anxiety. It was, some people, when they get fearful for their life, you have different bodily functions that kind of happen, and for me, it was, it still happens to me, but like anytime where I feel like I'm in fear of my life, I'm in danger, my reaction is to vomit, because I'm so anxious and so afraid that I'm having like a reaction within my system. And I've worked on it, therapy's good, but it's definitely just a symptom of my PTSD and my trauma, for sure. But I'm fine.
I just want to add something to your first question, that you see how effective creativity and art is in addressing these maddening issues, seemingly intractable issues like gun violence in this country, certainly. And, that was our motivation for myself and Kim to, continue the story of the human experience and the toll of gun violence. But, Bria, Sam, all the young activists that you met in the film are so dedicated to continuing this effort. They worked so hard through the last election cycle. They'll be out there again for 2022, and we are really committed in keeping the film out and bringing it to as many schools as possible and communities as possible, and especially young audiences.
Thank you.
So I have a historical point that I want to make, and I should have said it when I was doing the introduction, and then a question which Maria began to answer. It's interesting to note, almost tragically ironic to note, and Sam, I don't know if you know this, but almost 85 years to the day before Parkland, Franklin Roosevelt was shot at in Florida and came within inches of being taken from this country and not having the ability to serve during the Depression. February 15th, 1933, right before he came back to this house and packed up and then went to Washington. So I was interested in 2022, which Maria began to raise. Bria and Sam, I'd love to know if you have plans to be active in the off-year elections, and whether you know any of, Sam, any of the students you knew in Florida who might still be activists. And, Maria and I know, and I first met Maria during the 1977 election. They just keep coming. There's just another election, and it just goes on. I hope you don't lose your spirit to be in the game, but I'd love to know what you're planning.
Go ahead and go first.
I always call Kim for advice and everything because I really do love film and documentary and like journalism studies, and I feel like this whole visual representation that we just watched is like a long, ongoing journalistic approach, like really taking intersectional stories and diving into the communities that you're being a part of. Like Kim and Maria were always very friendly, always making sure that we were okay, and I think that's a true definition of a very ethical journalist. But hopefully in the future, in 2022, we start rebuilding these discourses, these conversations, and bringing in young people to be in these positions of telling stories, telling informational stories, like having us like on the pivotal front line of telling the truth in our communities. Because in Milwaukee, like you didn't have so much of a narrative. A narrative was already created for you based on like prejudices and biases. And I think it's really time for like young people, just like we've seen in 2018, galvanizing that momentum and being the truth tellers, the storytellers. So I'm hoping to start new initiatives where we have like this new wave of journalism. And a lot of people can tell me that print media is dead, but I love a good book. I love a good manifesto. And you see a lot of like organizations like the Black Panthers, Civil Rights Movement, they use literature to connect with people, to get into these communities, to actually have conversations and like digestible dialogues, like where you can come in and like ask people, what do you want to see? Like, what do you want to hear? How can we aid you? Like, how do you want your story to be told? And this whole narrative of how like we can, give the voiceless, a voice, but the whole time they've been speaking, like we've been talking, like Black and brown people have been in the marginalized communities for so long, like we've been having a voice, but never that connection, never the accessibility to attain it, the platform. So hopefully in 2022, we can start galvanizing that energy again, like in 2018, I just feel like everybody was just so mad. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I was just mad all the time, like refreshing Twitter, getting on the tour bus, like talking to Kim, rescheduling interviews, things like that, because like that anger of what life could be really just rested on my shoulders. But I think 2022 and like going through the pandemic and, the BLM movements and all this change in legislation, like we can start seeing like where that end point is. Like we can start answering the questions that we've been asking communities before of like, what do we want? Because it's been there, like we've been exploited, and like us raising these questions like can really get that true definition of journalism, the true definition of what film could be in storytelling. So hopefully we could bring more people to the polls, but also having continuous conversations outside the polls, because a lot of people aren't able to get registered to vote, aren't able to vote in this country, and they're being affected the most by a lot of the legislation that's happening and being created. So how do we make the people who can't be a part of this larger movement still a part of something as monumental as revolutionizing the young people, revolutionizing our country, and getting to a point where peace and prosperity, like our country preaches, what that could be like. So hopefully, just really connecting with young people, talking to them, getting an understanding of where everyone's head's at, because I think a lot of times, like in advocacy spaces, like we just assume everybody has the same position as us. So we assume that people feel the same way without having this dialogue. So I think 2022 is the year for conversation and communication for me, and then seeing what that fuel could lead into, and like how we can start enacting change by talking to each other first without assumptions.
And I'll just say that Bria has shared some very specific, very cool ideas, but it always strikes me with both of them, it's a tall order to get their schooling, be students, and try to stay in the game and get others. So any ideas you have to support these guys, they need it.
Hi, my name is Anna Carbonell, and I just really want to thank you guys for everything you've done. Sam, Bria. Sam, I'm sorry about what you've gone through. Bria, I feel everything that you guys have gone through. I have to tell you, I grew up in the civil rights movement. I grew up with the Black Panther, the Young Lords, the whole thing, but I was never really a part of it. I became a part of media for 30 years. I worked, that's where I met Harold. And I also met Maria. But I just want you to know my daughter is a real activist. She has been on those phones every election. And now my grandson just started Wesleyan, and he's already on the political science newspaper. He's a journalist, but that's not what he wants to do. He wants to be a contributor, and it's you guys that have allowed him to see what change can do. And music, as you said, it's the international language. And that's why it's so powerful, because it resonates with everyone. And again, thank you, God bless you, and thank you for inviting me here today.
Hi. Where else will you be showing the movie?
Well,
What
the
kind of
movie's been out for some time, and we've won 8 awards thus far. We've been to, despite COVID, which had its challenges we premiered it at the Sundance Festival, and then it rolled out to many places. We've played internationally. It's getting international broadcasts now. It's on demand. You can tell people to find it on all those platforms you imagine. But as Maria said, we really want to make a concerted effort to make sure, especially in the 22 cycle, that this gets a robust college and university and high school. Because as I was saying to Bria, there's nothing better than people from that age and younger. It's really reading well for middle schoolers, because they look up to these guys. And that's where, as you said, it starts. And there's so much evidence that in terms of civic engagement, if you get the first-time voters, they're in. And so that's a sweet spot, too, is to get to high school seniors who are turning 18.
Good evening. I wanted to say, as a student, and I wanted to respond even to you when you're saying how, it inspired students. I'll be honest, this is the first time I ever watched this, and there's no words to describe how inspired I am. I remember the March for Our Lives movement. I remember, well, I'm from Brooklyn. I go to Fort Hamilton High School, and I remember that we did have a small rally outside our school. And I remember when that happened, I was like, young kids, we can do that? I had no idea. And one of the things that it made me inspired, and I do remember that, is that it really inspired me to do advocacy stuff. Now, I didn't do as big as you guys done, and it's amazing what you guys have accomplished. Of course, I can only imagine the struggles and the fights that you've had to put in, especially through the legislation. I mean, I had my small battles here in New York City, but I can only imagine a bus tour during summer, 2 months. I cannot imagine. I can't imagine 2 hours on the train here. There's so much delays here. But Yeah, so I'm currently a student. I go to Baruch College. I'm a freshman. And so I remember my freshman year of high school when this happened. And of course, the next year, sophomore year, I decided to do advocacy work. I work with Laura as a youth action member. And so I am still, I cannot process this. And I'm not saying it's in a good way. Like, I just can't. As a student, I can't imagine how it must be for that to happen in your life, and of course to go on this journey of, advocating for change and, the changing minds of others, and of course it's difficult, and I cannot imagine. So I'm just inspired. I really am. And so my question would be that during the pandemic, I know that of course schools, we went online, we went at home. How did you keep fighting? How did you keep, putting in the punches and, keep fighting through with, the idea that we have to go inside, and really, like, Zoom can be boring, right? But of course, I know people are watching through Zoom right now, which is great. Obviously, Zoom can be great. It can be great, but classes-wise, it could be boring. So I wanted to ask, how were you able to, fight through the pandemic and keep the movement alive?
Yeah,
To your-
Jinx. That's a fantastic question, and I am just incredibly flattered. Thank you so much. Well, I think you saw, like, a lot of what our movement was also on social media. Like, we demanded people's attention by posting our message and our faces everywhere. Whether that was YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Like, I remember I had interviews with people who host mini channels on Snapchat. I didn't even know they did that, right? And so a lot of it is, how do people, what gets your attention most of the time? Your cell phone. Sorry, I swear it's not COVID. What's constantly getting your attention on the average? Your cell phone. How do you get all your news? Your cell phone. How do you get your music? Your cell phone. So the biggest thing was, really using social media in a strategic way to garner that attention, to inform people, to educate people of these issues that are happening. And a lot of how, people were informed, especially in the respect of BLM, of these, black and brown bodies on the ground, was through social media. And that is fantastic, because a lot of what is wrong with, with media itself is that it's incredibly skewed and subjective, and it's whitewashed. And so we were bringing truth to power. We were bringing what mattered most to people, to their faces, when they needed it, and how we needed it. And a big part of how we were able to float by during the pandemic was very much the things that we were already kind of practicing, which was educating and creating resources through social media, whether that was, educating people of certain funds that they can donate to people who have lost families to gun violence, whether that was informing people of grassroots efforts within their community, whether that was, shining light on a situation of police brutality, whether that's shining light on a situation of gun violence. This is all very, part of what keeps a movement going, is having your hands in every form of media in order to garner that attention. And that's essentially how we were able to amass, this march that had, millions of participants worldwide, was through the enabling of social media. And so that's a big part of it. And a lot of when I wasn't in person, wasn't doing things like this, I was on Zoom talking to people digitally. I was on Twitter talking to people digitally. And there is pros, there are cons to everything, but it is definitely a fantastic way of educating people. And I think that's the biggest part, is that we're not being correctly or efficiently being educated. So.
And I just wanted to jump on what you said before about, like, your walkout at your school, and like the different measurements of, advocacy, like having a movie or like doing a national tour doesn't ever deteriorate the mission, like the liberation. Like, we need people on the ground doing like local grassroots walkouts at their high school every single day, or as much as they can within their capacity. So I really congratulate you guys and thank you guys for, doing your duty in the mission. Like, we really need everybody in all aspects of that. And I think like during the pandemic, for me, it was so hard because like I lived right off of MLK Street, and I don't know if y'all know, but like in every community, MLK Street is always like bustling. Like every like Chicago, you could check it out everywhere. And when we were having these the BLM protests, like I remember seeing my first tank in the community, like where I would literally go up the street, buy a bag of chips, like garbage trucks, being set on fire, like police like coming in with like tear gassing and shooting people with rubber bullets. And I remember looking at my mom, and we were sitting on the porch, and we both were tear gassed, and I run in the house, and she's crying, I'm crying, and like we had a lot of like residential people in my community, like young kids, like elderly people, like who weren't even a part of the protest, right, but still being affected by the hands of white supremacy. And I think that's what switched for me, that a lot of Black and brown people do not have the luxury of, organizing digitally, because it's happening right outside the doors during a pandemic. And I remember going to sleep that night, like hearing all the commotion after, after that protest. And that really led me to like, even though it was a maxed up, community, it made me feel like we needed in-person conversation more than ever in this point. And so because we were starting to do in-person, organizing, the turnout was amazing. Everybody had so much time to, like actually go out and organize and do what they had to do and have these intersectional approaches. And what helped me like get through the pandemic was the young people I was organizing with, because I was able to see how white supremacy doesn't just affect, white people, but there is people in my own community who were mirroring oppressors and like withholding power and like not letting young people enter the spaces of reforming, the mission or what's going on, the violence that was going on. And I remember having a conversation with this one man. We were marching for 5 days, and we were like we didn't have any protection. We didn't have any like body helping us with it, but like another movement who were much older, they're Black and brown, and they came to help us, and they were just telling us like, y'all need to go home. You're not equipped for this. Like this is too dangerous. Like da-da-da, just giving us shit basically. And like it was well deserved, because I'm very stubborn. But he had said to me like, I kissed my son goodbye, da-da-da-da, like saying all these things to me, and that really, really sat with me. And to this day it still does, because it really showed that even though young people are going to go out and do what we have to do to make a difference, like we have the support of older generations? Like, is this really an intergenerational movement if you don't allow us, the mobility, the fluidity, and the accessibility to do what we have to do to access these resources? So organizing for me and my community during the pandemic was like a civil war, because there were so many different organizing efforts trying to grab onto the resources instead of sharing. And so I wasn't fighting against oppressors, I was fighting against people, within my community who were a lot older, and so we couldn't have this conversation of intergenerational, change. And so we had to really just separate ourselves as the young people, which I do not like to do, trust me. Like I really would love an adult to give me the resources I need, like I really beg for that. But in that point of time, we needed to have discourses amongst ourselves and talk amongst ourselves to get, an idea of what young people needed in order to make it forward. So I think you did a really good job at, saying like walking out, doing what you have to do. And even though it's not like at a grander scale at all, it's just every single thing that you do within this movement is so revolutionary. It doesn't matter like how big or small it is, because it really is just all gonna happen in the long run. So I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing before.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can I just say, Edward has been to Albany like 5 times to lobby for like education funding and all kind like youth justice and all kinds of other things. Don't let him tell you he hasn't done anything big, because he has. And I just want to say, I've been doing youth organizing since I was a youth, and I came up in like the 90s, and we were the most apathetic generation ever. I often thought I was born in the wrong generation. But now, I started doing, working with youth, and I remember the year that y'all walked out, and it just changed something in, the youth ecosystem, It was the first time that we saw young people activated on such a mass scale, and it's been sustained ever since. I feel like something just, switched on, and so thank you. I get a lot more kids in my program now because of you, and they're doing wonderful things. My question is actually about sort of the multiracial coalition you created, because the media did, I remember at the time, as the media does, tried to really pit the Parkland students against students that were, advocating for inner city gun violence. And so, how did you come together, and, what strategies would you recommend for people who are trying to create those kinds of coalitions now?
Well, I would say I love this story and like that question too, because I think it's really important when you talk about gun violence, you need to have every single intersection. Like a bullet doesn't care what color you are, what you look like it'll enter anybody. So I remember when the Parkland situation was happening and hearing it, I was a member of my youth council and like we were discussing, different things happening in the country, but then like we started discussing all the things that were happening on the streets every day in our community. So it just switched back to like different focuses. And moving forward, when I was speaking on the panel in June, when I finally met the Parkland students, like I was just an activist. They invited like local activists in the communities that they were entering on the tour. And like after the panel, like Michael Skolnick, I'm not sure, I think he was in there. Like it was like, oh, the young people would love to have your voice on here. Like we have some kids from Chicago. Like other people were trying to make this like very interracial, very like intercommunal. And I remember like calling my mom that day, like, so can I go on this tour to talk about, inner city gun violence? And she's like, okay. And I'm like, tomorrow for 2 months. And she's like, okay. And I think like that perspective, this inclusion really shows like the humanity behind gun violence. And it's not really, you can't have a story that shows it without having every single dimension, every single community that's affected, because mass shootings only make up a small percentage of gun violence, like suicides, police brutality, everyday shootings on the streets. Like there's voices, like I was saying before, who are screaming, protect us, like come into our communities, heal us, give us the resources, like share our stories for years, for decades, like since, what you were saying before, in all these different organizations. But because of like the color of your skin, because of where you reside, your zip code, these resources weren't distributed. And I think in the movie, everybody like on this panel, Sam, X, David, everybody made a really good conclusion that this happened because we are white people, because we were affluent in that area. Not everybody, but a lot of people who were at that school or in the movement, had the privilege of being able to go on that tour. And instantly the media was attracted to this narrative, because they weren't attracted to black inner city kids who got hit by bullets every day walking to the school bus. Like that's not attractive because of how racist our country is created to be. So I think like this inclusion and this intersectional approach like really allowed like voices of color, people who are underrepresented, people who believe that their stories are never going to be shown, like can finally take a breather and say, yes, this is not normal for everyday gun violence to occur. This is not normal for a police officer to shoot somebody 15 times and still be able to go to Hawaii and never be held accountable. It's not normal that there's like a race battle all the time when it comes to who gets, justice for the violence that happens to them. So I really did appreciate Kim and Maria's approach when it comes to letting voices, black and brown kids enter this platform to share their stories and kind of separate ourselves from this communal idea of being black and, affected by gun violence, but rather being an individual who's in a community that's a reactant of white supremacy, and really having like a say and having a story, because I thought it was normal to hear gunshots every day before I went to sleep. Like that wasn't when I had that conversation on a national level, and that was a really big eye-opener for me when I was able to connect to kids with in Minnesota and like Chicago and LA and Oakland, and really have these conversations like, damn, like we really need to be given at like the platform to share our stories, because we're not going to get rid of gun violence if we're only going to just help a select few people, a select community. So I really did appreciate that. And
just to add to that point, like when it comes to like the kinds of gun violence that's most reported on, it's the only valid kinds are the most polarized, the most the most extreme versions of gun violence. And that's particularly the issue, is that gun violence is only covered when it's extreme, when they know that the headline is going to mount more viewership or audience comparative to something that wouldn't. And what wouldn't is the lives of black and brown people who are being shot and killed every single day in this country. And so the issue here is, I was very ignorant, and this collaboration was not natural. It didn't come easy, and that's the issue. Is the best way to foster something like that is, one, recognizing the privilege that you have in the platform that you stand on. Coming from a community like Parkland, we had the resources, the money, and the media in order to accomplish the goal that we had. If it were the other way around, it wouldn't have happened. And that's what we have to acknowledge when we look at this conversation, is that in order to create something to be more inclusive, you actually have to, first give a damn about the situation at hand, And then secondly, you have to come from a situation of not looking at it from a mass shooting perspective, not looking at it from a police perspective. You're looking at it from a violence perspective. This is something that we share in common. And when you share something in common, you can bring more power to it. So I would say that the biggest part of what made it work was enabling privilege to be something that was positive for all people involved, instead of it just being something where, a select amount of people get to benefit from the coverage. And that was the point. We wanted to expand the coverage that we were having, not to just include victims of mass shootings, which make up 0.6% of gun violence, but of all forms of gun violence. And that was particularly the issue that I struggled with, because being a fresh victim of gun violence, I didn't have my head screwed on right. I didn't know what I wanted. Did I want safer schools? Did I want guns in schools? Did I want every place to be this like militarized war zone where everyone could just do what they want? Did I want no guns? Did I want some guns? Did I want all guns? Like, you don't know until you have conversations with other people who've been affected by gun violence. And that is the issue. If you don't have the representation of survivors, you don't have the representation of real life gun violence, you're never gonna get anywhere. And that is why this movement was as successful as it was the combination of intersectionality and privilege. And that's the only way that you can do it. Because if you don't have the money or the resources to get anything done, you're not gonna get anything done. And so what I'll say is that, like, if you can contribute, if you can financially, if you can bring media to things in your local communities and collaborate with people who are firsthand survivors of these situations, that's how you get the coverage. You don't get the coverage by just showing up somewhere and hoping for the best. So that's what I'll say.
And a good example, just really anecdotally, which wasn't in the film, is that I really respected what we were able to watch on the road, was that, X and David in particular were getting a lot of notoriety, and they refused to do any interviews unless they would be paired with local, right? They would, not do it.
And that's continued in their advocacy as well.
Yeah, so I think that's become more of a meta thing, is that people do need to stand up and not be complicit and challenge the media in what Sam's talking about, but well said. Thank you, and I just want to say, for any Zoom or students, check out March for Our Lives chapters or other organizations, and really quickly, I just feel remiss. It's something we've talked to March for, is the infrastructure bill, and that there's a lot of, Maria, you want to say a word about?
The infrastructure bill was finally passed, as we all know. There are earmarks, and there are resources available for, as you say, work on the ground and on the, I think you can hear me, but on every level. So please pay attention to that and lobby when possible about money being directed for gun violence prevention. It's so critical. And thank you, Harold. Thank you to Roosevelt House, Hunter College, and all of you.